it seems like we're in the early phase of another Bridget is trans situation in which uh you 4chaners and like people on Twitter are trying to push this narrative that Leo from Tekken of Tekken fame is in fact non-binary or trans or something other than a biological female. And this is something I've been aware of for quite some time. I've commented on it actually. Like if you Google like transgender video game characters, you get people like Samus Aran, Nato Shirogane, and Leo. And I acknowledged this like a while back. I talked about this because it feels like these are like the kind of characters that like the Western video game industry is trying to target to try and like get them to officially transition the characters, right? Like, right, we've been seeing this happen for a long time, especially like with NATO. NATO in particular, I think, is like the first instance I've been made aware of this kind of behavior, right, from the trans community, and I think it's affected other characters as well, like Bridget, I think being the most notorious example. But I'm curious, like, where the Leo thing is going to go because I've looked at like wikis and like they're already like they're doing things like saying that the character's gender is unspecified and like using they them pronouns, but then like you can also find easily discoverable information confirming that Leo is in fact biologically female, right? It's a lot like the Yamato thing from One Piece, right? Where like a lot of people like think that for whatever reason that Leo is like coded trans because like she's kind of androgynous. She kind of looks like a femboy, like a stereotypical like anime femboy. She kind of looks like Elliot from Dead or Alive, I think. But like we have enough lore from the character. We know like her real name is Eleonora. We know like we know like a general idea of like what the character is. Like there is no real debate, right? Like much like the Yamato thing, much like the Bridget thing before it was retcon, like there really is no debate. And I have to wonder, like going into Tekken 8's release, like whether this is going to cause like a new shitstorm. Like I wonder if this is going to cause like a new controversy because I wonder if like they they're going to cuck. Like, I wonder if Harada's going to cuck. And like, going by what I've seen, I don't think so. Like, I glanced at the image from Tekken 8. Like, I think they showed her off in like the newest trailer, and from my understanding, is that like she looks more feminine than she ever has before, which is I find kind of interesting. Like, it seems like the thing with Japanese media these days is to like pretend that like characters are like ambiguous or like androgynous or whatever when they're really not. Like we saw this with Juniper in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. We've seen this a handful of times in like some manga and anime series. I think Yamato is a really good example. Like um we've seen this happen like more and more often, and I have to wonder if like this is going to be like a trend going forward, and wonder how long it's going to last because I have I said this after Daisuke cucked with the Bridget thing and like Guilty Gear like pretending Bridget is trans. Like I no longer care what creators say about their characters. Like if you have established lore when it comes to characters, when you have like a concept, when like the character makes it to a final game, like you have to like treat that finalized game as canon, right? And if you try to retcon that, if you try like implementing like some ridiculous continuity, like like pretending a character is trans when they clearly weren't before, like of course fans have a right to disavow it and like address like the fact that like yeah, this just doesn't make any sense, and we're not going to treat it as canon. So like I think Bridget is an interesting situation in which like the character is officially trans, you know, supposedly, but like, the fan base, like, by and large, just seems to kind of dismiss it and kind of write it off. Like, it reminds me a lot of how, like, Poison was officially trans in like the English version of Final Fight, right? Only for the creators to come out later and say that like she was always meant to be female, and now it's kind of a joke like among fans, and like it's kind of shocking that like Poison uh has not been like made into like official trans yet for like the same reasons. It's like okay, like it's the same thing. Like we're talking about video game characters here, right? Like if it's not like a long lasting like aspect of the character that's part of like an entire line of games, it's not going to be considered canon. Right? When you look at like Super Mario Bros., like how often do you see people talk about like Donkey Kong as part of that continuity, or talk about like, ooh, Mario was abusing Donkey Kong initially? Like no, like game theory will like make jokes about it, and like people will like jokingly try to put it into like the lore or whatever, but like by and large it's generally considered like not important to like, the way the series developed and stuff like that. It's just like an early installment, like weird aspect of like the character of Mario, right? Like before, like they established like who this guy was and like what his personality was like and like the general style of things, right? Like Donkey Kong was intended to be the mascot of it, right? So it's interesting to think about it in this context, where like even if like they go through down this route of like trying to like push Leo as like non-binary or trans, like who cares? Right? It's going to be the same issue where like they have this nobody character in this fighting game that nobody really cares about, that's like allegedly trans or non-binary when like she wasn't before, right? So as a result of that, like it's gonna get buried under like the established lore. It's gonna get buried under the real continuity, and the people who like obsess over Leo for this reason, like will probably be like the character's only fans, and like people will be like alienated from her for that reason, right? We saw this happen a little bit with like Bridget and like Juniper, like I mentioned, where it just becomes like unbearably annoying, especially when like these people don't actually play the game, which is like very frightfully common with these kind of fan bases. Like I really have to wonder if like these secondaries who are only interested in these brands for like representation reasons are like really watch the shows at all, because Gundam had this weird situation with like they ended a series early, and like they tried like doing this thing where they didn't confirm whether the lesbian relationship like actually went through or not. So like it felt like to me that like the suits, like the business people, like they pulled the plug on it because they realized it would damage the brand, but the creators were like dead set on like making a Yuri thing in Gundam or something. And in the end they just weren't allowed to do it. And like like I wonder, like it feels like there's really nothing they can do. Like no matter how many like LGBT people you put into games, no matter like what you how you depict them, like how many of them are, like what franchises, like how relevant the role is, how popular the character is, like it's never going to normalize this kind of behavior. If anything, it's just going to make more and more people like recognize the patterns and realize how ridiculous it actually is, right? Like it just feels like it's all going to fall apart at some point. Like when the whole Bayonetta thing collapsed, right? When people like spent like a decade pretending Bayonetta was like a gay icon, and that like she and Jean were in this like eternal lesbian relationship, and Luca was just some cuck watching. Like when those people got like blown out, right? Last year with the release of Bayonetta 3, like it was a glorious moment. It was so good, right? People were so excited about it. It was legit like a really cathartic moment, and it honestly like made me a fan of like Bayonetta and Luca being together, as opposed to like where I was at before, where I didn't like the idea of Bayonetta being in a relationship. I was always like very consistent about that. Is that like I felt like Bayonetta should be like perpetually single, right? I thought that was like kind of the appeal of the character. But now, like, they managed to make me a fan of Bayonetta and Luca. They gave them a cute daughter. Like they what were based. They showcased, single-handedly and within like a 5-second cutscene why relationships between men and women are important, right? Children, right? No matter how much you cope, no matter how much you see, no matter how many tweets you, no matter how many tweets you make, no matter how many children you abuse, like you will never be the parent of your own child, right? That is like the reality of the LGBT community. Like it does not work. Like it cannot work. It is not possible. And it's honestly kind of laughable that like so many people genuinely seem to think that this is something that's going to lead to like long-term happiness or success or prosperity, when the process is doomed to fail within a generation, right? Not even a generation, within like 10, 20 years, right? You are wasting your time. You are wasting your life pursuing a goal that simply will not happen. It's just insane. Like looking at like again, this is how these people are wasting their time. Is like trying to convince you random Anons on like message boards, like people on Twitter, YouTubers, that video game characters like Juniper, like Leo, like Bridget, are secretly trans or gay in the case of like Ike and Soren, or like Sheik was a big example back in the day. Like, ooh, Sheik is trans. Well, actually, Sheik has been like trans so long that like people don't even like it predates the entire term, right? Like I never once heard like Sheik being referred to as trans growing up when like I was arguing with like women who like legitimately believe, well, girls who genuinely seem to think that like Sheik just grew like a massive dong like when she transforms. Like it's like, oh man, like Zelda literally turns into a man. Like I never once heard the term like transgender in that conversation, right? Like it was just like a weird Fujo thing back then, and it's a weird Fujo thing now, right? And I have to wonder like how much longer this can continue. Like I wonder how much longer until like developers stop like entertaining these people. Because I really wonder if like the whole Bridget thing is gonna come back and bite Guilty Gear eventually. Like I'm sure like the character is less popular than he's ever been. Like I'm sure that Japanese fans are mad at Daisuke. I'm sure like Guilty Gear is going to become less popular. Like I'm curious like what's going to happen going forward when it comes to this IP and when it comes to like the westernization of Japanese properties in general. It's interesting because when you look at Final Fantasy 16, like people talk about the long stream of like mediocre releases being like the reason for 16's failure, but like I think more prominently is that like it was the westernization of it. I think it was the woke aspects. I think it was like the trying to appeal to Westerners. I think it was like trying to be an action game. Like there are all sorts of reasons why Final Fantasy 16 bombed, but it did bomb, and we thought that Final Fantasy 6 was going to be one of those brands that like continue to do well in Japan no matter what, but they completely shot themselves in the foot, and nobody knows why. Nobody can put it together. Not even me. Like I was shocked at how well 15 did, and like I was sure that 16 would like at least do like half as well. Like I was sure the sales were going to go down, but like I wasn't sure by how much. And then we actually see the sales. We actually see those numbers, and they're terrible, especially in Japan. And it's like, oh wow, go woke go broke is real. Despite all the coping and seething right now, go woke go broke is absolutely real, right? We are seeing it happen over and over again, and I have to wonder if it's going to affect like Guilty Gear. I have to remember. I have to like wonder if it's going to affect Tekken if it goes in that direction. Like I have to wonder if it's going to affect like any of these other properties, which it seems inevitable at this point that like this is a thing that's coming for all of these brands, all of them, and it will be glorious. But yeah, we have to talk about like each individual battle as they come up. We have to talk about woke aspects in games. I definitely want to like take some time and like talk about like woke aspects and things that I like. Like I would like to like talk about you know some of the decisions in like Batman the animated series or whatever. But like Mortal Kombat 1's coming out soon. I'm sure that'll be woke in some way, shape, or form. So that we'll be talking about that. But for now, like let the warning be put out there. Let it be acknowledged that there is a very real agenda to make Leo from Tekken trans. And I, not being a fan of Tekken, not being a fan of the character, will do everything in my power to protect this girl from the groomers, from the sex pests, from the predators, from like the LGBT community on Twitter. Like I will do everything in my power, but it is up to the fan base. It is up to Tekken fans to stand up and defend the integrity of this female video game character, right? You have to do it. You have to do it. You have to stand up for your rights. You have to stand up for the franchise and its legacy and its characters. Like if you love Tekken, you have to speak up about this kind of thing.